The chamber was enormous. It floated in the cold silence of deep space, held together by ancient gravitational anchors built by the Varun collective over 6,000 years ago. The Galactic Council Hall was not just a building. It was a symbol, a reminder to every species in the known galaxy that order existed, that law existed, and that power was shared among those who had earned it. Thousands of alien delegates filled the curved seats that spiraled upward in rings, each section color-coded by species. The air inside was filtered to suit dozens of different biologies. Gases shifted in quiet, invisible streams so that every creature could breathe without masks. The hum of translation technology buzzed softly beneath the sound of clicking, chirping, rumbling, and whistling that filled the hall as species communicated among themselves. At the center of the floor stood a single raised platform. It was called the Voice Circle. Whoever stood there was heard by all. Today, a human stood there for the first time in history. Ambassador Mara Vasquez was 43 years old. She had short, dark hair, weathered brown skin, and the calm expression of someone who had spent 20 years negotiating in places where a single wrong word could start a war. She wore a simple gray uniform, no medals, no decorations, just the small blue insignia of Earth's interstellar diplomatic corps on her left shoulder. She looked very small in the center of that vast hall. She knew it. She did not care. The Council had not invited Earth. Earth had applied. There was a difference, and every delegate in the room understood it. Applying for Council membership was considered bold. Applying after only 60 years of interstellar travel was considered foolish. Applying when your species had no army recognized by galactic law, no allied empires, and no territory beyond a single star system was considered something that did not have a polite word in most galactic languages. When Mara's name was announced and she stepped into the Voice Circle, the first sound that came from the chamber was laughter. It began in the section occupied by the Draft hegemony, large, insect-like creatures with armored shells the color of dried blood. Their laughter was a rapid clicking of mandibles that filled the air like static. Then it spread. The Valhari Confederation, a species of tall amphibians who controlled 17 star systems, let out their version of laughter, a low rhythmic bubbling. The Gorath Empire, ancient and militaristic, simply turned their enormous heads away as if the presence of the human was not worth acknowledging. Small screens flickered throughout the hall as delegates communicated privately, sharing jokes in dozens of languages. The translation technology was good enough that Mara caught fragments of some of them. A single world, species applying for full membership. They still fight each other on their home planet. They have been in space for 60 years. My empire has been in space for 4,000. Let them speak. It will be amusing. Mara waited. She stood still with her hands clasped behind her back and waited until the noise settled. When silence finally came, she spoke. My name is Mara Vasquez. I represent the United Earth government and all 9 billion humans living on and beyond our home planet. We are here because we believe the Galactic Council should represent all intelligent life in this galaxy, not just the species that have been in space, the longest, or the ones with the most warships, or the ones whose empires were built on the suffering of smaller civilizations. The Drath ambassador, a massive creature named Crix Val, leaned forward. His translator produced a smooth, almost pleasant voice that felt deeply wrong coming from something that looked like it. You speak of suffering, little creature? Your species has been in interstellar space for 60 of your short years. You have 1 planet, 1 moon colony, a few scattered research stations. You have not suffered anything at a galactic scale. You are an infant standing in a room full of giants and demanding to be taken seriously. More laughter. Mara let it happen. You are correct, she said after a moment. We are young. We are small. We have one planet. She paused. For now. There was something in the way she said it. Not a threat. Her voice was completely level. But something in the silence that followed those two words made a few of the older delegates glance at each other. The Varuan representative, a being who existed as a cluster of bioluminescent gas held together by a crystalline frame, pulsed faintly with yellow light. The Varuan were not known for emotional displays. Yellow meant something close to interest. Krixval was not interested in being cautious. He spread his upper limbs wide, a Drath gesture of contempt. The Council has reviewed Earth's application. Your species has no interstellar military. Your fastest ship takes 3 years to reach the nearest inhabited system. You have not signed any territorial treaties because you have no territory to protect. You produce no resource that any member of this council cannot obtain more efficiently elsewhere. Tell me, Ambassador, why exactly should we waste the council's time discussing your membership? Mara reached into the small case she had brought with her and placed a data chip on the platform's interface surface. A holographic display expanded above her, showing a slow-rotating map of the galaxy. Dozens of systems lit up in red: wars, active conflicts, ongoing territorial disputes between council member species. 47 active conflicts, she said. Right now, as we stand here in this hall, 47 wars are being fought between species who are all members of this council. In the last 200 years, 3 species represented in this chamber have been completely exterminated by other species also represented in this chamber. The Galactic Council did nothing. It passed resolutions. It issued statements. It held meetings. She let the silence breathe. We are not here to add another warship to your arms race. We are not here to compete for territory. We are here because someone in this room needs to say out loud that none of this is working. The hall was quieter now. Not silent. The background noise of breathing and movement never fully stopped, but quieter than it had been when she entered. The Gorth High Speaker, a being the size of a small vehicle wrapped in ceremonial armor, finally spoke. His voice was deep enough to feel in the chest. Pretty words. Humans are known for pretty words. Your history is full of them, and also full of wars, genocides, environmental collapse, and political failures so spectacular that our intelligence services study them as cautionary examples. He leaned forward. What you are is not a model of wisdom. You are a warning. Yes, Mara said simply. We are, and we learned from it. She pulled up a second holographic display. Population figures. Economic data. Recovery timelines from Earth's historical periods. 150 years ago, my species nearly destroyed its own planet. We came within decades of complete civilizational collapse from climate change, resource wars, and biological disasters. We did not have aliens to help us. We did not have advanced technology. We had 8 billion people who disagreed about almost everything. She zoomed in on a specific data cluster. And we fixed it. Not perfectly. Not without cost. But we fixed it. Without outside help. Without a galactic council to pass resolutions on our behalf. Krixval clicked his mandibles together slowly. And you think this makes you qualified to join the most powerful political body in the known galaxy? No, Mara said. I think it makes us qualified to ask why this body, with all its ancient empires and vast resources and thousands of years of experience, still hasn't managed to stop 47 wars. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had weight to it. Several delegates who had been visibly amused when Mara entered were now very still. The Varuan representative pulsed yellow again, then shifted briefly to a color that had no translation in the human visible spectrum. but the being beside it, an elder delegate from the Sarati Assembly, leaned slightly away, which observers of Varuan body language knew was significant. Crixvow looked at Mara with his compound eyes for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice had lost some of its casual contempt. You have 3 standard days to submit your full membership case to the council record. The session will reconvene. He paused. Do not waste our time. Mara picked up her data chip. We never do, she said, and walked out of the voice circle. Behind her, the hall erupted. Not in laughter this time. 3 days passed quickly in the cold vacuum near the council hall, but inside the station's diplomatic wings, those 3 days felt like 3 years. The corridors between delegation suites buzzed with a kind of energy that veteran council observers said they had not felt in decades. Something had shifted. Everyone could sense it, but very few were willing to admit what it was. Ambassador Mara Vasquez did not sleep much during those 3 days. She worked with the small team of 12 humans who had traveled with her, analysts, linguists, historians, and 2 specialists in galactic law so obscure that most council species had forgotten the clauses existed. They worked in tight rotation, eating at their stations, speaking in low, focused voices. The suite they had been given was deliberately small, an old insult to low-status applicants that had never been updated, because low-status applicants usually did not last long enough to complain. The humans did not complain. They pushed the furniture aside and covered every wall surface with projected data. What they produced in those 3 days was not what anyone expected. Most species applying for council membership submitted what was called a standard presence document, a formal record of their military strength, economic output, territorial holdings, and political alliances. It was essentially a resume. It told the council what the species could offer and what it would cost to make them an enemy. The format had not changed in 2,000 years. Earth submitted something else entirely. They called it the Coherence Report. It was 400 pages long. It was not a record of Earth's strength. It was a detailed, precise, and devastating analysis of everything that was wrong with the Galactic Council itself. Every failed intervention. Every war that escalated after a council resolution. Every species that had gone extinct while council members debated procedure. Every resource treaty that had been quietly amended to benefit the largest empires at the expense of smaller ones. Every vote that had been bought, traded, or simply never taken. The humans had somehow obtained, cross-referenced, and organized 800 years of council records and turned them into a document that read less like a diplomatic submission and more like an indictment. It hit the council record system at the start of the 3rd day. By midday, every delegation had read at least part of it. By evening, 3 different ambassadors had requested emergency private meetings with Mara. 2 delegations had formally complained to the council chair that the document was illegal, and Crixvow of the Drath hegemony had gone completely silent, which, for a species that communicated almost constantly through sound, was an alarming sign. Mara met with the 3 ambassadors, one at a time. The first was Sova Lin of the Sarati Assembly, a quiet, precise species of small bipeds with silver skin and enormous dark eyes. They were not a military power, but they were one of the oldest civilizations in the council, and they remembered things. You included the Sarati border accords, Sova Lin said, without greeting. The Sarati did not use greetings. They considered them a waste of time. The original transcripts, not the official version. Yes, Mara said. Where did you find them? Your own public archive. Section 7, subsection 44, under a file category that was mislabeled as agricultural trade records in 2,200 of your years ago. No one had looked at it since. Sova Lin was quiet for a moment. The Drath will want to know how you accessed that? They can ask, Mara said. It was a public archive. Sova Lin studied her carefully with those dark eyes. You are aware that publishing those transcripts has effectively proven that the Drath hegemony violated the border accords 40 years before the Sarati-Drath War began. A war in which 4 million of my people died. Yes, Mara said. We are aware. Sova Lin's silver fingers moved in a sieve. Small pattern on the table between them. Sarati gesture that the human linguist in the corner quietly identified as something between gratitude and warning. You have made a powerful enemy today, Ambassador. We had enemies before we arrived, Mara said. At least now they have a reason. The second meeting was with an ambassador Mara had not expected, a representative of the Freth, a species that most council members treated as a minor power not worth serious attention. The Freth were small, nervous-looking creatures with brown fur and large ears. And they had spent the last 3 centuries in a quiet, grinding economic relationship with the Goraith Empire that everyone knew was closer to occupation than partnership. The Freth ambassador, whose name translated roughly as N, sat across from Mara and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then N said, "Page 312. Mara nodded. Page 312 of the Coherence Report detailed a series of resource extraction agreements between the Goraith Empire and the Freth home system. The numbers did not match the official records. The actual rate of extraction was more than 3 times what the Freth government had officially agreed to, and the payments flowing back to the Freth were a fraction of what the treaties required. The Goraith had been systematically robbing the Freth for over a century, and the Council had either not noticed or not cared. Why? N asked. It was a short word, but it carried enormous weight. Because someone needed to say it, Mara said. N's large ears flicked forward and back. A rapid movement that her linguist whispered was consistent with intense emotion. The Goraith will retaliate. Probably, Mara agreed. Against you. Against Earth. Yes. You knew this before you published it. Yes. N looked at her for a long time. You are either very brave or very stupid. On Earth, Mara said, those are often the same thing. The third meeting was the one that mattered most. It came late in the night cycle, with no announcement. A soft knock on the suite door, and when it opened, the corridor held a single figure, tall, wrapped in pale gray robes, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of something that had existed for a very long time. It was a Varuan. Not the one from the council floor. This one was older. The crystalline structures within its gas form denser and more elaborate. It did not give a name. Varuan this old rarely did. It communicated through a small personal translation device that produced sound in a whisper. We have been watching your species for some time, it said. Mara said nothing. She waited. You are unusual, the Varuan said. Most young species, when they reach the interstellar stage, spend their first century trying to appear powerful. They build warships. They claim territory. They find the nearest weaker species and establish dominance so that they can approach the council from a position of strength. The pale figure drifted slightly, the gas within it shifting in slow currents. You did none of this. We had no interest in repeating old mistakes, Mara said. And yet you have done something more aggressive than any warship, the Varuan said. You have told the truth. In this hall, in front of every power in the galaxy, you have put 400 pages of truth into the official record. A pause. That cannot be taken back. No, Mara agreed. It cannot. The Drath hegemony has already contacted 3 of their allied fleets. The Goraith High Speaker has called an emergency session of their internal war council. Several smaller member species are quietly repositioning assets. The Varuan pulsed faintly, a deep blue color this time. You have not been in the council hall for 1 week, and you have already destabilized the political order that has existed for 3 centuries. Mara looked at the ancient being steadily. Was the political order worth keeping? Another long silence. Then the Varuan said something that no translation software could fully capture. A sound that existed at the edge of human hearing, complex and layered, that the device reduced imperfectly to the following words. That is the first honest question anyone has asked in this hall in a very long time. It left without another word. The next morning, when the council reconvened and Mara returned to the voice circle, the chamber felt different. The laughter was completely gone. In its place was something harder and less comfortable, the particular silence of powerful beings who have realized they are no longer in full control of the situation. Crixval stared down at her from the draft section. His mandibles were completely still. That was very unusual. The council chair, a rotund being from a neutral species called the Movin, who had held the chair position for 60 years through pure political survival instinct, cleared his throat and announced that Earth's membership application would proceed to formal debate. He said it in the flat, careful tone of someone reading from a script they had not expected to need. Mara looked out at the thousands of faces looking back at her, some curious, some afraid, some furious, and thought about the next step. Not the step she would take today. The step that no one in this chamber had seen coming. The one that would change everything. She had 3 more documents ready. The coherence report had only been the introduction. The formal debate on Earth's membership was supposed to last 5 standard days. It lasted 11. No one had anticipated that. The first 3 days followed a predictable pattern. Large empires lined up to speak against Earth's admission, each delivering carefully constructed arguments about how a single world species with no military recognition and no territorial standing had no practical role to play in an interstellar governing body. The Drath hegemony was loudest and most organized. Crixval himself spent 4 hours on the voice circle floor detailing Earth's lack of qualifications. He was polished, persuasive, and clearly had spent the previous nights preparing. He cited trade law, membership precedents, military thresholds, and economic benchmarks. Every argument was technically correct. Every argument carefully avoided the coherence report. But the coherence report had already done its work. It was not a document people could unread. By the 4th day, the smaller species began to speak. Not many of them. 3, then 4, then 7. They were quiet voices, species with 1 or 2 systems, civilizations that survived by staying below the notice of the larger empires. They had no great speeches prepared. Most of them simply stood in the voice circle and said variations of the same thing. The coherence report had described things they had seen with their own eyes and had never had the standing to say out loud. A species from the outer rim called the Shalari sent a delegate who read a single page from their own records, a record of how their fishing industry had been legally dismantled by a Gorath trade amendment without their knowledge 20 years ago. The delegate read it slowly, without drama, and then sat down. The hall was very quiet after that. Mara watched all of it from the Earth delegation gallery and said nothing. She had been advised by 3 different diplomatic advisors from other species to speak more, to be more aggressive, to press her advantage while the mood was shifting. She thanked them politely and ignored all of it. On the 7th day, the Drath made their move. It was not a legal move, or rather, it was structured to look like one. The Drath hegemony formally presented what they called a security review request, a rarely used council procedure that allowed any member to demand a security audit of a non-member species before their application could proceed. The stated justification was that Earth's coherence report contained information obtained through unauthorized intelligence operations, and that the methods of obtaining this information needed to be reviewed before a species that gathered intelligence. This effectively could be trusted with council membership. It was, diplomatically speaking, a sophisticated move. It was designed to buy time, to shift the conversation away from the content of the coherence report and onto the question of how Earth had compiled it, and to imply, without saying outright, that Earth was some kind of covert intelligence threat to Council security. It was exactly the kind of procedural trap that had been used against smaller species for centuries, buried in obscure Council law, difficult to challenge without looking defensive, and capable of delaying an application for years. Mara had been waiting for it. She was on her feet before the draft ambassador had finished the formal submission. She walked to the voice circle with the calm of someone who had read the same procedure that was being used against her and had spent 6 months preparing her response. "The security review request filed by the draft hegemony," she said clearly, "is filed under Council Security Code 7, Article 9. I would ask the Council Chair to confirm the full text of Article 9 for the record." The Council Chair, who had already had a deeply exhausting week, pulled up the text with a look of a being who suspected things were about to get worse. He read it aloud. Article 9 specified that a security review could be filed against a non-member species, but it also included a subsection that almost no one had ever invoked, because almost no one had ever needed it. The subsection stated that if the non-member species could demonstrate that the information in question was obtained from public record, the security review would be immediately invalidated, and the filing member would be required to pay a formal diplomatic penalty for procedural abuse. All 1,247 documents referenced in the coherence report, Mara said, came from public archives, mislabeled, buried, improperly categorized in some cases, but public. We did not steal anything. We simply read what was already there. She looked directly at the draft section. We are very good at reading. The diplomatic penalty for procedural abuse was not enormous by itself, but the precedent it set, a large empire formally penalized for trying to weaponize Council. Procedure against a small species sent a visible shock through the chamber. 3 delegations that had been quietly neutral until that moment shifted their body language in ways their species-specific observers understood as movement toward the Earth position. Crick's Val stared at her. For the first time, Mara saw something behind his compound eyes that she had not expected to see from him. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. The Gorath High Speaker intervened that afternoon. He did not use the voice circle. Gorath of his rank considered the voice circle too small for them, so he spoke from his delegation box, his voice filling the chamber without a microphone, because it simply did not need one. "Enough of this," he said. "The procedural game has been played, and it failed. Let us speak plainly. Earth's admission would fundamentally change this Council. The small species who have never had real power would use Earth as a lever to demand it. The existing order would be disrupted. That is the real concern. Let us say it honestly." It was, in its way, the most honest thing said in the Council Hall in years. The chamber was briefly, genuinely silent. Mara waited to see if the High Speaker was finished. Then she said, "Thank you. That is the first honest statement made in opposition to our membership. And I agree with you." Several delegations made sounds of surprise. The High Speaker's great head tilted slightly. "Our admission would change this Council," Mara continued. "The current order would be disrupted. Small species would have a stronger voice. Large empires would have less unchecked power. That is precisely the point." She turned slowly, addressing the full ring of delegates. "We are not applying for membership to gain something. We are applying because this Council needs what we bring. Not warships, not territory. A different way of thinking about how power should work." She paused. "You have been the most powerful civilizations in this galaxy for thousands of years. And in those thousands of years, you have managed to start 47 wars, eliminate 3 species, and impoverish dozens of others, all while attending regular meetings and writing very formal documents about it. Something stirred in the upper galleries. The sound of delegates speaking rapidly to each other. Then the second document arrived. Mara's team had timed it precisely. While she had been speaking, the second Earth submission had been filed into the Council record. It was shorter than the coherence report, only 90 pages. But it was more dangerous. It was called the Cascade Analysis, and it contained projections. Not guesses, mathematical models built from 2 centuries of Council-documented conflict patterns, economic data, and resource trends. The models showed with a precision that several Council scientists would spend the next 2 days trying to disprove, but could not, that the current political structure of the Galactic Council would result in a full-scale galactic war within 800 years. Not a war between 2 empires. A war that would consume the entire Council membership. A war that once started based on the weapons and military doctrines already in development among the major powers, would kill an estimated 60% of all intelligent life in the explored galaxy. It was not a threat. It was a calculation. Earth had simply done the math that no one else had been willing to do, because doing the math meant admitting where the road led. The Council Hall took 2 full days to process it. Every major delegation called their own scientists, mathematicians, and strategic analysts. Every major delegation came back with the same answer. The cascade analysis was essentially correct. The numbers were real. The trajectory was real. The only serious dispute was about the timeline. Some models said 600 years. Some said 900, but the destination was not in serious doubt. On the 11th day, the vote on Earth's formal membership debate was held. Not the final membership vote that required more process, but the procedural vote on whether the debate should continue and whether Earth should be granted provisional observer status in the meantime. It passed, not by a small margin, by a margin large enough to be embarrassing for the Droth hegemony, which had spent 11 days organizing opposition. 31 species voted in favor of continuing the process with Earth as a provisional observer. 14 voted against. 7 abstained. Among those who voted in favor, the Sarati Assembly. The Freth, 6 other small species who had never voted as a unified bloc before in recorded Council history. And in a move that caused an audible reaction across the chamber, the Varuan Collective, who had not cast a non-abstaining vote in over 200 years. Crixval left the chamber without speaking. Mara walked back to the Earth delegation gallery. N of the Freth was waiting in the corridor outside, small and brownef. The Droth hegemony did not make their next move in the Council Hall. That was the first sign that something had genuinely changed. For 3,000 years, the Droth had fought their battles through Council process, through votes, procedures, alliances, and legal maneuvers. They were brilliant at it. They had built their empire not only through military force, but through a mastery of galactic law so complete that other species had stopped bothering to read the fine print, because they knew the Droth had already found every advantage buried inside it. They went around the Council entirely. 14 months after the provisional observer vote, 3 Droth hegemony warships entered the outer edge of Earth's solar system. They did not cross any formal boundary. Earth had not yet established recognized territorial limits under Council law, which was, of course, the point. The warships simply sat there, at the edge of what any reasonable being would consider Earth's home space, broadcasting on open frequencies, the kind of calm, technical communications that meant nothing threatening on paper and everything threatening in context. It was an old move. The Droth had used it against smaller species many times. The message it sent was simple. We can reach you whenever we choose, and no Council rule stops us from being here. The communication Earth received from the Droth that accompanied this positioning was polite. It was an invitation for direct bilateral dialogue outside of Council framework. It suggested that Earth, as a sensible young civilization, might want to reconsider some of its recent diplomatic positions. It used the word reconsider 4 times in 2 paragraphs, which required no translation to understand. Earth's response took 6 hours to arrive. It came not from Mara Vasquez. She had returned to the council hall, but from the United Earth Government's Defense Coordination Office. And it was sent on the same open frequency the draft had used, which meant every species with a listening station in that region of space received it simultaneously. The response was 3 sentences. The first acknowledged the presence of the draft vessels and confirmed their coordinates. The second sentence noted that Earth had, over the previous 14 months of provisional observer status, been busy. The third sentence contained a list of coordinates in return, not of Earthships in the solar system, but of draft hegemony assets throughout the galaxy, military supply lines, fuel depots, communication relay stations, the positions of 17 draft fleets, the location of the Draft High Command's backup coordination center that was not on any public record, and the precise orbital paths of the 6 draft colony stations that housed the families of hegemony leadership. Earth had not threatened any of these things. The message simply said, "We see you. We have been seeing you for a long time." The 3 draft warships left Earth's solar system within 48 hours. They did not return. This exchange reached the council hall within days and spread through the galactic diplomatic community within weeks. What it revealed about Earth was not what most species had been assuming. Everyone had understood the coherence report as a demonstration of intelligence gathering capability. Everyone had interpreted the cascade analysis as a demonstration of analytical sophistication. Both were impressive for a young species, but not threatening in a way that changed the fundamental power calculation. Warships were warships. Information was more complex. But what the response to the draft revealed was something different, a quality that most species had not considered when evaluating Earth, because most species did not have it themselves. Earth had strategic patience combined with real-time awareness. They had been watching, not just reading archives, actively monitoring, tracking, mapping the movements and assets of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, while simultaneously conducting a careful, methodical diplomatic campaign. They had done this quietly, without drawing attention, from a position of zero formal power, and they had waited until exactly the right moment to demonstrate it. In several galactic languages. The concept being described by analysts after this event translated roughly as the calm of something that already knows it will win. It frightened people in a way that warships did not. Warships could be counted. This could not. Mara filed the 3rd document on the day that news of the draft withdrawal reached the council hall. She had waited for that timing deliberately. The 3rd document was called the Framework for Mutual Continuity, and it was not a report about what was wrong with the council. It was a detailed, practical, operational plan for fixing it. 60 years of reformed council procedure. New mechanisms for conflict resolution between empires that had no economic incentive to stop fighting. A proposed system for protecting small species from slow economic absorption by large ones, with specific enforcement protocols, independent audit structures, and consequences that were graduated, transparent, and enforceable even against major powers. A new framework for resource sharing that modeled itself not on the treaties the large empires had written for their own benefit, but on the kinds of systems that had allowed Earth itself to survive and recover from near-collapse. It was not a utopian document. It was intensely practical. It anticipated objections, built in compromise positions, and explicitly acknowledged that large empires would lose some advantages they currently held. It was written with the clear understanding that the beings reading it would look for every flaw. Every loophole, every way it could be rejected, and for each anticipated objection, there was an answer ready. The Gorath High Speaker spent 3 days with the document before he spoke about it publicly. When he did, he said something that no Gorath leader had said about an outside species in recorded history. This was written by people who understand power. He did not say it admiringly. He said it carefully, the way one might speak about something they had underestimated and no longer could afford to. The Sarati Assembly formally endorsed the framework within a week. The Freth did so within hours of the Sarati, followed by 11 other small species, who had now begun operating as a loose coalition that the Council record keepers had started calling, in a dry bureaucratic shorthand, the Earth Bloc, though it contained no Earth warships, no Earth territory, and no Earth threats. It was a block of species who had decided that the way Earth thought about things was worth following. The Varuan Collective published a formal statement. Varuan formal statements were rare. This one was 4 words, which in Varuan communication was the equivalent of a lengthy essay. The framework is correct. Krixval demanded an emergency closed session of major powers to discuss the framework before it could be formally introduced for vote. The session lasted 9 hours. What was said inside, it was never officially recorded, but 3 delegates present later described. In separate private communications that were never intended to be public, but ended up in the Earth blocks, intelligence files anyway. A Drath hegemony leadership that was doing something observers had not seen from them in centuries, arguing with itself. The unity that had made the Draths so effective as a political force was cracking. Because the framework had identified the specific internal contradictions in Drath governance that the hegemony's outer colony worlds had been building resentment about for generations. Filing the framework publicly had given those colony worlds language and structure for something they had felt but never been able to articulate as a political demand. Earth had not invaded the Drath hegemony. They had handed the Drath's own people a mirror. The formal council vote on full Earth membership took place 11 months after the framework was filed. The debate period had been extended twice, both times at the request of major powers who needed more time with the document. On the day of the vote, the council hall was more crowded than it had been in living memory. Species who held observer status, but not membership, had sent delegations to watch. Communication relays broadcast the proceedings across hundreds of systems. An event that had begun with laughter was now being watched by billions of beings across the galaxy. Mara stood in the voice circle one final time before the vote. She had been given the traditional pre-vote address, in which an applicant was expected to summarize their case for membership. Most applicants spent this time listing achievements, making promises, or appealing to the emotions of delegates. Mara spoke for 6 minutes. She did not list Earth's achievements. She said only this, that every civilization in the galaxy had once been young, and every civilization had made choices about what kind of power it wanted to be, and that the Galactic Council had been built by species who chose a particular answer to that question: power through force, through precedent, through the slow weight of accumulated control, and that the council they had built reflected that choice perfectly, including all of the wars and extinctions and suffering that were the natural result of that choice, and that Earth was asking for a place in this council, not because humans were better, but because they had made a different set of catastrophic mistakes and learned different lessons from them, and that perhaps 2 sets of hard-won lessons were more useful than one. She said, "The galaxy is very large, and we are all in it together, whether we vote that way or not." Then she stepped out of the voice circle, and the vote was held. 40-4 in favor, 9 against, 4 abstentions. The Drath hegemon